Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Tiffany Pewitt. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life, and I'm a co-director for the Grounded Knowledge Project, which is a Henry Luce Foundation funded initiative to create gathering spaces for scholars and as well as resources to help folks who are doing community-based research and public scholarship, and to create spaces for conversation, networking, resource sharing. We're so excited to be collaborating with ACLS as part of this initiative, and to have ACLS leading this workshop today, Vocation and Location. So I'm now going to be turning this over to John Paul Christy with ACLS, and we're excited to share this conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. This is really exciting to be participating in the Grounded Knowledge webinar series. This is a project that, for those of you who haven't followed up and looked at what's the resources that are developing on the Grounded Knowledge page, it's really going to be a terrific site with some really interesting conversations focused on publicly engaged scholarship within and beyond the academy. So I really highly recommend it, and we're really happy to be participating in this this session and this series. My name's John Paul Christy. I'm the Senior Director of US Programs at ACLS. I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague, Desiree Barron-Callaci, who's Senior Program Officer in US Programs at ACLS and really one of the leads on our publicly engaged scholarship initiatives at ACLS. We are thrilled to be here with you, and especially thrilled to be joined by a set of scholars who are doing really interesting work as part of some of those initiatives and way beyond the ACLS initiatives in advancing publicly engaged scholarship and thinking about the ways that that work can be incorporated into doctoral education and the ways that we can support and nourish that work done by scholars, PhDs, emerging PhDs, faculty, scholars of every career stage working within and beyond the academy in a variety of contexts, and how that work can best be supported, best be incorporated into collaborative projects, and best be recognized for the kinds of labor and different kinds of contributions that go into that work. So I'm going to very briefly introduce our panelists who are going to be part of this conversation. Desiree and I will be moving into a little bit of context after that so that we can say a few words about the initiatives that are related to the work of the scholars that we've gathered here today. And then we will be moving into a discussion format. We're really excited also to turn this into a broader discussion. So if you have questions, we invite you to put them into the chat during the discussion. We will be reserving time at the end of the webinar for a broader Q&A, and we're very happy to make comfortable time for that so that it's not rushed at the end. But first, I'm very pleased to be joined by Ashley Cheyemi McNeil, who's a 2021 ACLS Leading Edge Fellowship recipient. She's working at Full Spectrum Features as the Director of Education and Research there. She earned her PhD in English from Georgia State University and a PhD in American Studies from the Obama Institute for Transnational American Studies at Johannes Gutenberg University in Germany. Before joining Full Spectrum Features, she was the inaugural Humanities for the Public Good postdoc fellow at the University of Iowa. Moriah King is joining us today too, who is a doctoral candidate in anthropology at Brandeis University, where she's pursuing research on race, property rights, farmland conversion, agriculture, and environmental anthropology. With Jonathan Shapiro and Anjaria, who's also joining us today. She is co-author of the piece Enabling Community Engaged in Public-Facing PhDs, which appears in the report Preparing Publicly Engaged Scholars, A Guide for Innovation in Doctoral Education, which ACLS just released last week. And finally, last but not least, we're joined by Jonathan Shapiro Anjaria, who's Associate Professor of Anthropology and the inaugural Faculty Director for Professional Development in the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Brandeis University. Someone who has worked with ACLS over the years and has worked with us in a number of contexts to advance really innovative research. But most recently, he has been a Mellon ACLS Scholars and Society Fellow. It was in the inaugural cohort of that program, and that program provided multi-year awards for scholars who were pursuing community engaged work embedded in community organizations in the first year of their fellowship and returning to their host institutions, to their home institutions, their universities, to think about change in doctoral curricula and making a more inclusive space for different approaches to publicly engaged and community engaged work and for PhD career pathways. So really glad to be joined by three terrific scholars. Our goal for this next segment is to provide a little bit of context for the work that we're going to be talking about. So I'm going to ask Desiree to take it from here and to kick off a discussion of our Leading Edge Fellowship Program.
Awesome. Thanks, John Paul. Can everybody see my slides? Good. Excellent. Excellent. So as John Paul was getting at, this program, the Leading Edge Fellowship Program, and the report that he mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about that too. These are part of a whole suite of initiatives at ACLS that are broadly geared towards promoting the value of advanced training in the humanities and the humanistic social sciences, while also recognizing that a more inclusive and impactful academy has to be one that responds to the unique needs, aspirations, and potential of a diverse set of PhD students and recent PhDs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the program, its structure and its goals. And also, I want to encourage anyone who's here or watching this as a recording to check out our active competition, because we are actually accepting applications right now up until March 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern. So in terms of the history of the program, the Leading Edge Fellowship Program was conceived in the summer of 2020. It was part of a number of rapid response efforts at ACLS meant to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its effects in society. And this particular program, funded with the support of the Luce Foundation in its first cohort and later by the Mellon Foundation, we saw this as an opportunity both to respond to the negative effects of the pandemic and also to build on ACLS's ongoing work to promote the value and applicability of advanced humanities training in careers beyond academia. So in this way, this program is sort of a doubling down on the proposition that advanced humanities training has serious practical value and has the potential to make an impact far beyond the academy. So the structure of the program, so as I said, these are hosted fellowships. ACLS, of course, runs an application process to select the fellows. It's a nationwide competition for the fellowship. But the meat of the fellowship experience is a 2-year position at a social justice organization. So this program really starts with ACLS partnering with these social justice organizations, devising 2-year positions that are meant to draw on the skills that one hones in the course of the humanities PhD. And then for those portfolios of work to be opportunities for folks to build on their knowledge and experience, and also to learn new things and to demonstrate their potential and their skill. So fellows are hired by these host organizations. They have the opportunity to advance the strategic mission of these orgs and their important work in communities beyond the academy. And like I said, have the opportunity to build a portfolio of work supported by these host organizations as full members of their staff for the 2 years of the fellowship. And while fellows are in the midst of their fellowship and afterward as alumni, ACLS provide additional resources for professional development, including networking and mentoring through our alumni community, professional development funding, career coaching, and opportunities for fellows to come together and to reflect on their professional identities and how those change as they move into different kinds of roles, what it means to seek sustainable and meaningful work, and what those longer term career goals are. And on that point, returning to the current competition, I want to say that the structure of how we select fellows is even itself meant to be a professional development opportunity. So the structure of the application is that potential fellows submit cover letters and resumes tailored to the positions that I mentioned that we advertise in the competition. And so even for folks who aren't successful in ultimately gaining a fellowship position, they have the opportunity to refine these job materials, these non-academic job materials, and to really demonstrate sort of the broad ways in which they see their skills and experience having an impact beyond the classroom. So what's really exciting is that fellows who are selected in the current competition are going to have the opportunity to work with a set of 21 organizations doing work in very different communities across the United States, operating at really different scales. The positions themselves vary widely. Folks will be working in communications, policy analysis, community engagement, development, lots of different sort of professional hats. But all of these roles are in organizations that work deeply with communities in the production of knowledge and in the production of action in their strategic mission. One of the organizations we're excited to be working with, a former Scholars in Society host, the Los Angeles Poverty Department, is a 38-year-old actor and activist collective in Los Angeles. They create deeply researched performances and multidisciplinary artworks that connect the experience of people living in poverty with the larger social structures that help shape their lives and communities. Another one of the hosts we're excited to work with this year is the UFW Foundation, who do policy research, engagement, and political action on behalf of farm workers across the country. And another wonderful organization we'll be working with in the 2024 competition is Full Spectrum Features, but I will let Ashley tell you more about their work in just a bit. But I guess the most important thing to say about this program in this context is that our hope is for fellows' success stories to serve as an example to folks who are current students and recent PhDs who are seeking to make an impact beyond the academy, and really showing an example or a blueprint for the different kinds of professional pathways they might take. We also hope for these positions and the success and the projects that fellows undertake to prove to folks beyond the academy that the humanities PhD is impactful and that these folks have potential to make a big impact. And we see this firsthand. John Paul and I are lucky enough that when we get to meet with prospective host organizations for this program, they come to us very excited to hire a humanities PhD. And sometimes, often, they're excited to work with a humanities PhD because they've encountered one of our fellows sort of in the wild. They're working at an affiliate organization, or they see them at a professional conference, and they're blown away by the work that these folks do. And they start to imagine how a fellow might help them to rethink their approach, to rethink their work, and to bring these humanities methodologies to bear in working with communities, right, to create knowledge and action. And I guess finally, we also mean for these positions to be demonstration projects for faculty, so that faculty and graduate students can think together about how their PhD training can ultimately lead to these kinds of post-PhD opportunities. Very related to another project at ACLS that John Paul is going to share a little bit about.
Thank you, Desiree. And here you see at the top of this graphic, the American Council of Learned Societies, our full name. ACLS is a representative organization, one that represents 80 scholarly associations in the humanities and social sciences, and is a platform for the leadership of those societies to come together and talk about issues of shared concern. We're also very interested in maintaining networks of colleges and universities, and we work very closely among those colleges and universities with PhD granting institutions, talk to faculty, graduate students, recent PhDs, deans, directors of graduate study, to think about and support different kinds of work that's going on there and what could be areas that are in need for particular development where ACLS's support can be especially meaningful. And one of those projects that we undertook starting a few years ago was the Scholars in Society program. And I mentioned this earlier when I introduced Jonathan. This program was a program of 3 cohorts of 12 faculty each, and those faculty were embedded in particular community organizations during their fellowships, where they did some research work, but also contributed to the missions of these organizations. And as Desiree said, we're thinking very actively about how the work of the humanities and interpretive social sciences can play into and advance the core missions of the organizations that they were partnering with, while also learning a lot about the kinds of work, skill sets, capacities that were really valued and at play in these organizations. When they came back, they brought that information to those lessons learned and those insights into their departments, where they developed different kinds of programming. Some of it was about developing professional development resources for graduate students. Some of it was really focused on curricular change, thinking about the new ways to focus the curriculum for incoming students, so that it was more broadly encompassing of the different kinds of work that PhDs have always been doing out within and beyond the academy, but haven't always been recognized for doing that work. And to think also about different opportunities for community engagement within the dissertation process. So a lot of different projects were being developed and pursued by these successive cohorts of fellows. We were so impressed by the work that we're doing that we invited them to reflect on that work in a report that we have just released. As you can see from this slide, it's called Preparing Publicly Engaged Scholars, A Guide to Innovation in Doctoral Education. So it draws on the experience of the Scholars and Society Fellows, but really critically, as we saw from so many of the fellows talking to us over and over and over again about how important it was to them to rely on the experience, the perspectives, the commitments that graduate students in their departments were bringing to their work. All of the contributions to this report are co-authored then between a faculty member, the Scholars and Society Fellow, and one or more graduate students in their department. So the goal with all of these across the different contributions is to demonstrate the value of publicly engaged work, to really offer the leaders of particular departments the opportunity to think concretely about innovations in doctoral education, how they can enact some structural change that makes the work more meaningful for graduate students who are really interested in thinking about the many different kinds of valences of doctoral education and the different kinds of impact that their work can have, and offer some ideas and some recommendations for sustaining this work and thinking of equitable partnerships between the academy and the many different sectors that our scholars were engaging with beyond the academy. If we could move to the next slide, Desiree. I just wanted to point out two elements of this report. If you go to our website, and we'll drop the link in the chat for this for you to follow up and read through the report, there are a couple of different pages. In one of them, I believe it's called Project Teams, is a sort of interesting guide to the report, which has 12 different contributions, but allows you in a sort of really evocative and interesting table of contents that allows you to understand what kinds of contributions and what kinds of project teams were contributing to the report. And finally, we were really interested in abstracting from these essays, these contributions, and from ongoing conversations that the faculty and graduate students have engaged in with ACLS over the development of these contributions, a resource page for graduate students and faculty and administrators to think about how best to implement work and best practices in that work in their own institutions. So we've developed a resource page that will continue to build up, and we hope that this will be a communal enterprise for everybody working in the humanities and interpretive social sciences to write to us and talk about different ways that we might highlight particular resources that would be especially beneficial to those who are pursuing this work in their own departments. So with that, I just wanted to invite all of you again to check out these programs. For those of you who are in or finishing up a PhD or recent PhDs who are interested in working beyond the academy, please do take a look at the Leading Edge Fellowship program and the current application. There will be webinars coming up for specifically targeted for applicants to ask questions and get advice on putting together a strong application. Those will be coming up soon. And if you go to the webpage for the Leading Edge program, you can register for that. But we really hope that you will also take a look at this report, which we're going to be teasing out a little bit and thinking together with our terrific panelists about the kinds of work, concerns, commitments, priorities that animate their particular practices in scholarship and their work beyond the academy. So with that, I believe we can turn it over to our panel. And if I could, I'll just kick it off by asking a question of, I'd like to start with Jonathan and with Moriah to start because since we were just talking about this report, and to ask them to say a little bit about the collaborative writing process, since we mandated based on what in our call for contributions that these should be collaboratively written, but that mandate was only there because we heard so much from the fellows and the graduate students they were working with that this collaborative approach was so generative. So Jonathan, could I ask you to start and then turn it over to Moriah?
Sure. Thanks, John Paul. So you want to ask about our collaborative writing process? Is that the question?
Yeah, about how your piece came together and how you affected it.
Yeah. So as we say in the report, I think early on we wanted to make sure we captured both of our different perspectives on some of the challenges and possibilities for making community engaged work a central part of the PhD. And we also wanted to be clear that our ideas on this have evolved over the past few years, and so I think that's what we settled on, thinking about having coming up with some questions that we would answer in the report, and then answer the essay, kind of structure the essay as a kind of a back and forth conversation. Of course, it wasn't like realistic, but we thought it really corresponded with the conversations we've been having over the years about really taking seriously what community engaged work means. And then practically about collaborative writing, we wrote we were physically separated. We wrote in different parts of the world, and we would write a little bit and then share drafts and then kind of go build on each other's writing in an iterative process. I don't know, Moriah, you want to speak more to that?
Yeah, you really covered it. I was actually going to mention that one part of the collaborative writing process was also pushing each other to share a little bit more about the experiences. For you, at least, being a part of the Scholars in Society group, I knew you had more to share than what you wrote. And then also you pushing me to take the space in the article to talk more about my research and not to be afraid to really dig into how it has changed and how a lot of that change, is what happens when you are doing community-based research and you are allowing your, research design strategy to be flexible and really connected with all of the work that you're doing. So yeah, I'm disagreeing with what he said. We wrote back and forth, and as we started writing, we actually realized it was a conversation, a continuation of a conversation that began with Jonathan and I, even before I started as a PhD student at Brandeis. And so, yeah, I think he covered it.
That's really interesting. And also just the fact that this is a long-term conversation that sounds like it was part of even a party to the admissions process of going to Brandeis. So thinking about how important it is to make even the admissions process one that is welcoming of a variety of approaches to thinking about research and about careers. That's sounds really key. But you mentioned your research, Moriah, so I wonder if we could dilate about that, about your research interest and what brought you into to graduate study. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how what those research commitments are, what those interests are, and how publicly engaged and community engaged approaches plays into your vision for scholarship.
Yes, I'm going to give a shorter version of what's in the article just to kind of answer your question, which is, first of all, what really brought me to graduate school. Well, what brought me to graduate school was community-based research. I didn't know that that was what it was called at the time. I just had been kind of involved in a research practice that it was at the federal government, it was at a corporation called Corporation for National Community Service. Some of you may know it. It is the organization that administers the AmeriCorps program. And in that small little office of this small agency was a small office with women who had their PhDs, and they were on a mission to do more funding for community-based research and qualitative research. And in a short way, from joining alongside of them and under their mentorship, I learned that it would be best for me to go to graduate school and learn the process or practice of doing deep research and in doing that based in the community. So that is one of the things that really drove me. And to go back to your point about the admissions process, what I didn't know when I was going to different grad school days was that that wasn't the norm. It was a little bit more normal, or not normal, more to say, or more expected that you would already have an idea of the theoretical interventions you want to make and how your research is going to change that. But from talking to Jonathan, who at the time was in this Scholars in Society program, he actually told me, no, the idea that you have is great. And, I think you really, here's how I'm approaching it. And I would encourage you to take classes outside of even our department that will fit with the type of research that you want to do. So I'll talk about my research now, and then hopefully if people have questions, if I missed anything, they can ask. But right, so my dissertation research is focused on a group of Black farmers in the South who are building up farms and are participating in this USDA-funded beginner farming program. And my larger kind of overarching purpose is really to explore how new and beginning Black farmers, specifically Black women farmers, are building and designing their farms, and what the process of their journeys can really make known about the political, economic, gendered, and kind of social dimensions of agriculture, specifically in Georgia. And even though I am very interested in, how the USDA is defining agriculture and practices, I'm very much interested more primarily in working with these Black women farmers to figure out how they are navigating and engaging kind of the demands of the state and things with what they are doing in the space and the land that they're stewarding. So the community, so that's kind of the research part, but the community engaged practice really looks like things that folks may consider to be a little, not objective enough. So in my research, I serve as a co-farmer. I undergo the farmer training programs with them. Some days, I'm helping and being an assistant. Other days, as you can see, I'm actually at the farm and talking about, the spring farm and the garden plans. And for me, I don't think you asked the question, but I want to go ahead and name it. For me, community engaged research is really about how you obligate yourself in the kind of questions that you're asking, and how you really tie yourself to others in pursuit of shared goals and shared questions and shared change and intentional action. So for me, asking these questions about how Black farmers are building farms in a system that we know is discriminatory, and we see lawsuits that are happening, it's just really strange to me not to co-involve myself and be a part, to the extent that I can, and within my research, be a part of actually helping to build something that is sustainable and that actually has deliberative action towards it. And I didn't say everything and maybe all over the place, but I'm happy to take more questions about a little bit more about the community engaged research part later.
Thank you so much, Moriah. No, that was terrific and a really good sort of survey of sort of sort of diachronically, but also across different the different dimensions of your work and what commitments you are bringing to it, and even just practically how that's playing out. That's really exciting. And I do encourage people, as they have questions, so that we can, as you don't forget them, to drop them in the chat and about any aspect of what we're talking about, including particular research that's being undertaken by participants in this discussion. But it's making me, thinking about the conversation you referred to in the admissions process and the sort of welcoming environment for community engaged scholarship. It makes me, I'd like to turn to Jonathan and ask about your own experience doing, you were part of this Scholars in Society program, but it's something that I know has been animating, those values have been animating your work for a long time. But what you can say about some of the lessons learned from your experience in that program and what you were eager to bring back into Brandeis.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, certainly for a long time, I've been thinking a lot about like, what is I mean, my field is anthropology, but thinking more broadly, like what is what value as interpretive social scientists or humanities, the work that we do, how do we show the world that the value of what we do? So as a fellow in the Scholars in Society, during that year, 2019-20, I was working with the Community Development Department in the city of Cambridge, which is effectively their urban planning department. And at the time, they were redoing their bicycle plan. And so I helped them, as I was effectively like their in-house ethnographer. I was helping them collect stories around mobility, how people about transportation, about access, how people move through the city. And then through these long conversations, often in context, I tried to be as ethnographic as possible. I would convey that information. The goal is to connect that to the city staff. And so John Paul, you asked like, what do I learn from that experience? I mean, the number one lesson I learned was that the way I've been trained as an academic to communicate information just often doesn't often work in non-academic context, just to put it bluntly. I immediately saw that, what gets valued in academic context, which is like our wonderfully, leisurely writing style, or maybe our use of many words to describe things, to put it bluntly. Often, people, so I would describe things, and then, the response is often like, that's all interesting, but how do we act? Like, what can we do with this? And I took that as a productive challenge. I mean, this is, people I was working with were very, really saw the value of ethnography and the value of anthropology. So it was coming from a really good place. And so it was moments like that where I saw that like we should, as humanists or anthropologists or social scientists, what I saw was that the non-academic world like really wants to see there's a desire to really connect with the world of academia, but often we as academics are putting up a wall between what we do and the non-academic world, and at our disservice. And so for instance, I saw, for instance, the need to communicate, of course, clearly, succinctly, but also not, the other thing I saw was we can't just, as anthropologists, I'll speak for my field, I saw that we were very good at pointing out problems and describing the problems in a lot of detail. We're not so good at offering solutions. And I remember even in my own training in graduate school, offering solutions was seen as like not as cool as offering like a theoretical insight onto what we're observing. It was actually, there was a hierarchy, and it seemed as like the applied part was seen as lesser than anthropology that focused on theory. And that just, to me, that just like does us academics a huge disservice. These people really want to think like, what can we do practically with the information we're providing? So taking those points, what I learned was trying to think about new ways of communicating our research, thinking more about problem solving, not just articulating what the nature of the problem is. Then after that experience, I mean, I'm fast forwarding quite a bit of time, but then so the next year back at Brandeis, I did a few things. I mean, first of all, so I designed some new classes. So one was a graduate course called Practical Ethnography, very much, and this is where it was effectively a research methods class for anthropology, but the focus at the end was solving a problem and also working with a client. So we had, for example, I had we worked with the university library as a client, also some connection with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And the goal was to really translate the research into like communicate in a way that's really useful for that audience outside the academy. And also I teach an undergrad course on applied anthropology. So, but then, beyond that, so we saw a need like at the graduate school to really just to show, everything kind of back to what Desiree and you described, so wonderfully, that we need to show that the variety of career pathways for people with humanities and social science degrees, and we can see that there is, in the past 10 years, that there's a huge growth in the kinds of jobs that people with these humanities and social science degrees have. Is expanding, and there's a huge variety of these positions. But there's a bit of a disconnect, like often in graduate programs, that people are not really aware that those positions are even out there. So what I did with the help of ACLS funding the year after my grant, I put on a series of really very informative panels that really helped. I learned a lot too. And the most important thing were inviting people with recent PhDs in the humanities and who are working in a variety of fields. So whether there's nonprofit, government, industry, and foundations, etc. And just having them we had 1 hour Zoom sessions, and having them just describe their career journey and have them talk. They just talked about the current work they do, but also I think the most of the valuable part was how they talked about the current work they do, like even in a very unexpected setting, like in industry, for instance, was still, as many people put it, like still scratching that itch. So in other words, they're still doing anthropology. They're still doing what they loved about being an English PhD, and really, challenging a lot of myths, frankly, that are very prevalent in the academy. That, for instance, like a myth that the only real academic work, only real intellectually curious work happens in an academic context. And of course, that is not true if you actually talk to folks who, like on this panel, who have PhDs and have a variety of jobs. So with the help of doing this programming, then finally, the last stage in this kind of journey was the graduate dean and I, we saw there was a need for this across all departments at the graduate school. So, and we developed a new position, which I currently have. It's a half-time position, the other half I teach, which is faculty director of professional development. And the key, there's like two key parts of that. Like the number one, the logic is that we saw a clear need for this has to be a faculty member who is deeply involved in career development and effectively oversee career services. And so I effectively operate as a kind of a cultural bridge or cultural broker between the academic work graduate students do on one hand, and then the career services stuff. So meaning like, how do you write a resume? What's the difference between a resume and a CV? And then secondly, really inspired by all the work ACLS does, is really just helping students explore multiple career pathways from day one. And that's going back to, and there with what Moriah was saying was, I started all this when Moriah started. And that's also that kind of the fact that we're making these our own career transformations over the last few years is what we represent, what we wrote about in our essay.
Thank you so much. That was, and I know you condensed a lot of time there, but that was a really interesting trajectory. And you touched on a couple of things that lead me to a question that I'd like to open to the entire panel here, which is, when you talked about that it was important for a faculty member to be involved in this career support and career professional development for graduate students in arts and sciences. To me, it suggests, and it probably suggests, there are a lot of good reasons for it. Something that's come up a number of times in us talking to applicants for our Leading Edge Fellowship, or before that, our Public Fellows program, which was that there was a sort of sense that this was work that happened outside of your traditional curriculum for being a doctoral student, that you were often doing this on the side, that it wasn't relevant to your research, and that in fact faculty were only concerned with you getting a job within the academy and not seeing you happily pursuing your interest in whatever very worthy realm of endeavor that takes place in. So I'm wondering, for for the group, if we could sort of step back broadly and say, are there particular cultures, structures, formats of doctoral education that make career pathways and community engaged work or community engaged work more difficult to pursue, that it's not recognized, that it's not centered. And so I'd open that to any of you, Ashley or Moriah or Jonathan, from your different vantage points, where you see some gaps in college or university or doctoral program institutional culture. And I could also invite every participant to drop some of their own thoughts about what those gaps might be into the chat, and we can look at those as well. What are some of the cultural barriers to thinking about careers, a variety of PhD careers, as well as community engaged scholarship? But Moriah, could I ask you first, and then we'll turn to Ashley and then Jonathan, and then open it up?
Yeah, I definitely have something. Yeah, definitely. So one thing I think as I'm getting towards the end of my, I guess, data collection period and will be coming into the writing portion, I think a lot about the relationship between the community engaged research and then ultimately the form of publication, the forms of writing that are still expected within different disciplines, within different schools, within different departments. And I definitely think one structure and culture that makes it still challenging during this moment of change is, the dissertation. Even being in a discipline like anthropology that, really heralds participant observation and field work, there's still the expectation that when you're finished, no matter what research you're doing, you need to produce a certain type of dissertation. And I guess to the pro, or some things that have helped to kind of reduce some of that friction or smooth it, has definitely been really being in the Department of Anthropology at Brandeis, because of a lot of the difficult conversations that Jonathan has had to have, that will open up the way that I might potentially, produce my work, where I don't compartmentalize still, in the writing process, all of the work that I'm doing, as a co-farmer, farm and training, and then the theoretical work of, unpacking and unraveling, the USDA and things like that. So I definitely will say the format still of the dissertation, and seeing that seeing that itself as having potential for a public form of scholarship, I think is definitely still yet a challenge. And depending on who your advisor is and who you work with, could potentially also be an opportunity.
Thank you, Moriah. Ashley.
Yeah, Moriah, I couldn't agree with you more. I come from literature and American studies, and that's a very monograph heavy, right, dissertation format, theoretical intervention, and just argue it every chapter, right? And that has had little application to my world now, right? Outside of academia, in terms of the long form argument. Another aspect in terms of superstructures of the academy that I think can be prohibitive is the strictures of the disciplines themselves, and how sometimes, certain methods, certain frameworks and approaches are requisite in certain disciplines, and then are not as recognized or are not permissible in a final dissertation, as a framework or something that you incorporate. And for me, with my experience now kind of working in a nonprofit org that is very, very dependent and driven from and by our community members and partners, I find myself crossing what I now think of as old disciplinary boundaries all the time. And I have to, right? I have to take on a historian's lens. I have to take on a social scientist lens when I'm doing, impact surveys, right? That are required to my funding reports, right? So all of these things are things that I think could have been that I could have really kind of sunk my teeth into during my doctoral education, certainly had brilliant minds and professors there who were doing really good work, who are experts in executing those methods. But it didn't feel, like it was in my home department, right? And so it wasn't something that I readily engaged as part of my own research for my doctoral programs. So it's kind of an impossible answer, John Paul, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to stick with it around these disciplinary silos. Feels like a structure that isn't, really helpful beyond the academy.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And I think one that we've heard commonly from alums of our programs about the nature of research and the ways that they've valued doctoral education, making them giving them the capacity to stretch and learn and engage with different modes of thinking, engage with different methodologies, whereas the limitations or the limits within the academy often reward boundaries that might even make for better scholarly production within the academy if they weren't there. But Jonathan, could I turn to you next?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and the answer really is that there are, as you mentioned, from the grad admissions till what Moriah said, till the end, till the dissertation format itself, there are so many ways that it's big. The challenge of community engaged work is it's baked in at all these moments. So, for instance, even at admissions, we all know what how for PhD admissions, looking at we ask for a statement of that letter, the statement of purpose, and it's almost always, I mean, maybe 99% of the ones I read are that it's about what is their applicants are expected to write, describe their research in a way about how their research is going to intervene in the field of anthropology. So the assumption is that they're going to be moving the disciplinary conversation forward, and applicants who write that they're smart, because that's how most probably all admissions committees are evaluating letters, unless they're told otherwise. And of course, implicitly, that there's an assumption that if you're applying for a PhD program, the end goal is to become a faculty member, and probably a faculty member at an R1 institution. And that's baked into it. So there are ways you can change that. So for instance, in the English department in Brandeis, they recognize this problem, that there is this implicit assumption that the goal is to be a faculty member. So they actually ask all applicants to their PhD program in English to list 3 potential post-PhD careers that they want. And because they knew they can't just say one, because everyone's going to say be professor, because that's what they think committee's going to hear, but forcing them to think of 2 other potential careers. And that opens up the possibility of, in a statement, even when they're applying, to talk about community engaged work or public engaged work. And then as we move on, I look at the comps. I mean, Moriah and I had so many conversations about what does a comps list mean? That's really, Moriah, you really, brilliantly pointed out, there's some flaws in the way that anthropology as a discipline assumes how a comps list should be, because the assumption is often that it's going to be the literature that what matters to the field. And as Moriah pointed out, well, what about literature that matters to the community that she's doing research with? Can that be in a comps list? And I mean, of course, I was like, yeah, of course it should, but the structures are pushing in the other direction. And then when it comes to dissertation proposal as well, that typically it's about, are you designing a project, the traditional ways, are you designing a project that is, again, moving the disciplinary conversation forward? Well, why can't there be a dissertation proposal where the questions are all about what are your collaborations going to be? How is this going to benefit the community? Or as Moriah put it in their essay, who are you accountable to? I mean, to me, that is the number one. I feel like that is that's the number one question that should be on every dissertation proposal, but it's not. I mean, that's just, but in the ideal world, it would be. And then finally, the format of the dissertation itself, which really should be open up to a variety of possibilities. And then, of course, courses, I think, actually, the key thing is it would have to be encouraging getting skills that are, non-traditional for your particular discipline. So in anthropology, that could mean getting, a course in survey design or quantitative work, even if your work happens to be qualitative. And that relates to actually your point too, which is maybe a shift away from this. We often have an overemphasis on expertise, this example I think of, again, I think from Moriah highlights it as well, which is to do surveys, you must be the world's, the expert in survey design. But I mean, that's not how things work outside of the academy. Like, you do qualitative work, you do survey design, you do all sorts of things. And I think we'd all benefit if we kind of embrace some, I don't know, amateurism or something, or like, we don't have, everything doesn't have to be professional at all times.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I also think that the there's an aspect of the humility of or that comes from um, understanding that you're not an expert on something in the academy that can be appropriately and positively applied to work outside of the academy. That means you draw on expert research to do the work yourself, but you don't have to be the expert in one particular thing to move it forward. I also just your point about the form of the dissertation is one that I know you and I have talked about in the past, and one that is still very much of interest to us at ACLS and to a number of the scholarly associations that are our members. And I know that MLA many years ago, now maybe almost a decade ago, talked about sort of blowing up or reforming the dissertation, and had a really interesting commission and report on this. It's something that we're also very interested in pursuing at ACLS. And I'm just going to drop a link in the chat here to our program, which is a newish program called the Dissertation Innovation Fellowship. It's one that does very much explicitly welcome applications that are exploring different forms of the dissertation, even as there might be other things that scholars might be pursuing in terms of community engaged work, digital work, etc., or sort of transdisciplinary work as well. So I'm just dropping that into the chat, and I hope people who are either advising dissertation students or pursuing their own dissertations or thinking about graduate school will look to that as a place where, if they are focusing on or wanting to pursue something that is non-traditional, to look to ACLS for support for that. But I'm going to turn it over to Desiree, who I think will continue on this question of bridging the academic to spaces beyond the academy.
Yeah, thanks, John Paul. Because I promised that she would, I wonder if Ashley would be willing to tell us a little bit about the work happening over at Full Spectrum Features, and in particular, how your own experiences in graduate school and then at Iowa have influenced your approach to sort of getting yourself into that work. And I'm sure that you've expanded and changed that, made a big impact in the work that you've done there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let me give you the elevator pitch of kind of what we do at Full Spectrum first. And so we're charting new territory. So I have developed and I lead the Department of Education and Research at Full Spectrum Features. And Full Spectrum Features is a small art social justice nonprofit. We're based in Chicago. And we started off as a film production company, actually. And we have since kind of moved to a lot of different directions, but always media-based, and always really thinking about how do we kind of embed radical inclusion across all of our efforts and programs, and how do we do that through our community, right? And so in my nugget of that world, right, in education, we actually build out what we call cinematic digital history projects, which is a big term, but it's pretty descriptive, because they are OERs, they're open educational resources. And what we do is we build a digital platform with a brilliant web designer, and we think about, how are we engaging histories that are often obscured or underexplored or underrepresented in standard K through 12 public curricula, right? And so we think about these so-called hidden histories, and we build out an online learning platform. And then we weave into this online learning platform an original short narrative film that is also on the topic of the hidden history that we are pursuing, right? So for example, we've received really generous federal funding to focus in on underexplored aspects of Japanese American history, which usually, might be like half a page to a page length around Pearl Harbor, right? In most history textbooks in like middle schools and high schools. And so we have focused in on the moment and the period of forced removal, right, going into camp, and then also right after camp, the forced assimilation back into white American culture after camp started to be closed and folks were, gradually released from camp. And so those are kind of the lanes in terms of history topics that we've been focusing in on. And so we've built these cinematic digital history projects to try to get some tools in the hands of educators and also available to learners, right? We learned a lot in the pandemic as well, like where learning happens, who the teachers are, and how that's really distributed across families and in communities. And we work at every single step of the production of these projects with our community members. So given our historical topic, we're really lucky that we still have members of our community with lived experience that we can consult with and rely on, you know. So I work a lot with our elders and really kind of seeking their guidance and their inspiration, I guess, as we build out kind of a more comprehensive learning apparatus for these hidden histories. We also kind of start pairing and building out educator professional development and trainings to empower educators and to think through what does it mean to meaningfully incorporate these histories that have so often been erased and obscured, right, in standard curricula. It's not an easy project. You know, as we all know, there's some states that try to err away from sharing histories that have been purposefully erased. And then there's other states like Illinois that have these wonderful mandates around, you know, like a requirement to teach Asian American histories in K through 12 spaces now, but that there's no kind of teeth to it. Like it wasn't a funded mandate and there was no kind of infrastructure for the implementation, right? So those are some of the like social contexts that we're working around in some of our goals. Desiree, can you remind me the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, no, it was very long. It was thank you so much. It was about how you're drawing on your experience, both in graduate school and then as somebody who, you know, advised and thought about graduate students, how you bring that into your current role.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say that my first foray into like community-based research was in my own doctoral program in Atlanta at Georgia State. And I got to be part of a fellowship that again was very much outside of my discipline, kind of ad hoc, like in a liminal space. And it was called the Student Innovation Fellowship. And basically I got to work with community organizations who were doing their own research projects. And then also professors from other disciplines, like I got to work with an urban geographer, for example, who had their own projects going on and they needed graduate support, right? And so that was kind of like my first foray where I started seeing, oh, there's different methods. Oh, there's different lines of inquiry. Oh, there's all these like other rich kind of approaches and histories of what learning looks like and what its impact, right, is kind of meant to be that are kind of divergent from what I'm learning in my own department, right? And so that's where I think the spark kind of lit for me, right? And thinking about how do I carve my own path? I was really lucky to have an advisor who from day one said, you must carve your own path and I'm here for it. So I want to like also give that plug because I probably wouldn't have pursued it much if I didn't have her support. And through that process, right, which really led me into my postdoc at Iowa for thinking about an applied humanities, kind of more transdisciplinary graduate program, there was so much about like, how do you do communal sense making together, right? How do you take aspects, perspectives, and experiences from, you know, in the case of Iowa, from faculty, from staff members, from community partners, from you know, community members, long-term community members, to be thinking about what would a graduate program, right, that is kind of transdisciplinary in nature, but still rooted in the humanities, what would that look like, right, like on the ground? So that kind of communal sense making. And then I think in Atlanta, it was really also from the perspective of impact for the folks that I was working with, like hand in hand, right? And Jonathan, you had mentioned like this idea of we're really good at identifying maybe the what and interpreting it, but like that decisional point or the affective point and the action that's where the drop off is. And I think that's something that I took note of also in my doctoral work, right? Was seeing how it's really important for us to do these academic studies that are based in community, like insights and practices, but oftentimes what does it yield? And I found that these studies, these kind of things that we produce for the academy can nudge a system toward change, but it's like playing the long game, right? And it's putting all your chips on this idea of the like little nudges that then like bubble up and transpire bigger changes in the future. And sometimes that's like really hard for communities, especially disadvantaged communities that have been disenfranchised and that have been marginalized like systemically, right, for many generations. That's a hard thing to say, oh, so you want to work with me, but I'm not going to really see anything. Like, why does your study on housing precarity matter, right? And so that was just kind of a thing that I kept tucked away in my head and my heart as I move forward into my work at Full Spectrum. So Desiree, I'm not sure if that is a direct answer, but I think just rooted in kind of like the ability or like my need to pivot in my disposition of how I'm understanding the purpose and effect of research has constantly, talk about humility, I've been, relearning that on a very regular basis.
No, that's wonderful, Ashley. And I think it really leads into the next question I want to ask before we open it up. We have a ton of questions, but this is one that I think kind of gets at some of what you're talking about, which is an evolution of disposition, but also a change in professional identity to some extent as you're moving between spaces. So I want to ask all three of you, Ashley, Jonathan, Moriah, whoever wants to answer first, what does it mean to you to be a public scholar? What do you think about that phrase? Is that one that's useful to you? And what does it mean to you in your current context and as you've thought about doing work that responds to the public in this way or is engaged with communities in the way that you have been?
Okay, I can go ahead and start and say that, I don't consider myself to be a public scholar yet. I think there is, community engaged research often and usually always leads to public scholarship. But I do take I think I'm starting to figure out this thing called public scholarship. And what I've noticed since I'm knee deep in research is that public scholarship and being a public scholar really does take a lot of different forms. I think we sometimes focus on those op-eds and those, writings the writing-based, textual-based forms of scholarship. But a lot of my public scholarship is in conversations with different people when they ask me what I'm doing as a student or what am I studying, and then being able to talk to them more about it and having them ask questions, and I can see thoughts are going. And while I may never know if that was what we might consider to be scholarship, at least for me, my form of public scholarship is really just whoever I encounter, whether it's even my own the farmers that I work with, thinking differently about things, and also, just doing the work of connecting certain happenings, certain social moments to larger things. So, for example, I'm thinking a lot about like what Ashley was saying in her work. And for me, I think one thing that has been shocking to me is how little people know the hidden history of Black land ownership, or even the hidden history of farms owned by Japanese Americans and what happened during that time, and making connections between all of these different forms of dispossession, and talking to people about it, saying dispossession, but also explaining sort of what I mean about that, and how all that comes into play when we just even want to talk about growing food. So I guess I would just say like how I think of public scholarship and being a public scholar is the writing, the textual base, but also really in the conversations and how I locate myself, outside of the academy, I guess.
Moriah, we should do a project together, number one. So I just want to put that out there. I think, yeah, the how we locate ourselves really resonates with me with what you just said, Moriah. And oftentimes when I see this like kind of term, right, this bracketed term of public scholar, I see like very two different hats oftentimes, at least, like that is that's the way that I have often encountered being a public scholar, because how I'm legible to the academy is very different than how I am legible to the community. And so for me now, being like on the other side and fully working, like full time at a nonprofit, and I'm not affiliated with a university, I'm not teaching at a university, et cetera. So for me, being a public scholar means that I am beholden first to my community, to the people. We're storytellers, and we work with educators around storytelling. And so that I am first kind of recognizing that they are my guides, but they're also my critics. They're the ones who have to sign off on the work that I do. And they are like my review committee, right? And that's like a very, very important thing, and they take that role seriously, and it's a deep relationship that we build. And then I think for me, secondarily, I am then kind of beholden to the academy, if you will, meaning the broad apparatus, right, of how I employ my own training, how I employ my disciplinary norms, how I rely on the things that I am really good at from my academic training, right? And for me, I think that the scholarship part of that, I think John Paul, you had mentioned this idea of the expert and releasing that hat and that title a little bit, or that expectation. And that's where scholarliness kind of surfaces for me these days, in that, like, I remember, my first week being on campus in my doctoral program and just being in wonder. Like, I'm a first generation, I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And so it's like this really big deal, right? And just thinking like, I can't believe that they chose me to get to do this, and I have so much to learn. I'm reading hundreds of pages a week, and it's just, I get to be the sponge, and that's my responsibility now. And like, I try to really bring that energy into my work today, right, with my community, where I'm not that expert, but rather I get to be this person who gets to learn from you, and like, what a place of privilege that is. And so that's where like my scholarliness, I think, kind of bubbles up when I think about being a public scholar today.
Just want to build off something that you just said was really striking, where you said that you feel like the community is your that's your review committee. And I was thinking from the perspective of, okay, how do we, which is wonderful. And then the thinking, how do we, change the structure of the PhD to in a tangible way to really make community engaged work like a central part of the PhD. And one way could literally be changing the committee, like the other kind of committee, the actual dissertation committee, which would be not just have faculty on that committee, but have people from the community, or have a practitioner, or whatever you want to call it, but not necessarily from your department, to literally be on like a review committee for your dissertation. And how that would lead to different kind of conversations, different expectations for, and then for like think about all the possibilities for what the format of the dissertation could be, that it have to be like, it would force it to really change and make the dissertation itself be much more, again, you mentioned legibility, responsive to the community concerns.
That is great. Those are three very interesting answers to this question, and one also that gets at some questions about structural change and how we do build up. I mean, there is a thing as expertise, and graduate students are building it, but how it's and honing it, and as scholars that happens, but how we think about that living out in the world, and how we think about that in relation to the communities that are investing in higher education, and are seeing it as a value for society, or not seeing it as a value for society, and how we can think about this as a way to discuss the value of the what we're learning, what we're studying, what we're investing our time in, just as Moriah very well put it in terms of thinking about the ways that we tell the stories and discuss what it means to study what we do. I want to make sure that we go into the questions. There are a few in the chat, and then open it up to the broader group to ask questions. I see two very nice testimonials about the the ACLS programs, especially the Leading Edge Fellowship Program. Thank you for that. Again, this is a good time to plug that applications are being accepted now for that program. But there's a question in here from Rebecca Husky. It's a two-part question, and the first part is, are there opportunities for mid-career folk who would like to move from theoretical work to more community-based research, and specifying that Professor Husky's work is in religious studies. I know that there's a big religious studies focus in the Grounded Knowledge project, and I'm guessing that a number of people are wondering about that pathways for doing this work within that field. I know that the folks, the experts that we have gathered here, our panelists are coming from different disciplines, as they've discussed, but I'd like to open it up for any advice on how people can start to move in this direction. I will say that the report, that the Preparing Publicly Engaged Scholars, is a good one for faculty to think with, not just about doctoral education, but about their own practices. So that's one place to start. I do see also that, I won't call on them to speak, but there's the chair of the Committee for the Public Understanding of Religion from the American Academy of Religion is here in the audience, Rabbi Mikva, who I know there are a lot of initiatives going on at AAR as well to illuminate pathways for doing this work, but trying to unify some of it and to make it more legible within the academy. But I'll turn to our panelists first for advice on their thinking on where to get started for people who have been working in the academy, but pursuing a different pathway that hasn't had a community engaged aspect to it. Jonathan, can I turn to you first?
Sure. I think first, just begin close to home. Like, think about your own, like, where you're living and your neighborhoods, and then also the issues that you personally care about, and begin there. I would say the best way to get started is, let's say there is an organization that you want to collaborate with or do work, is you're going to have to, you have to offer often you have to offer a concrete skill. That's something, and so I remember for me, for instance, when I was doing, this is my other research, this is in my research in India with an organization. They wanted me to learn editing and making short. They want me to learn like filmmaking, so I can make short films for that organization. And so, in other words, like I learned a concrete skill, which is film editing, that I never thought about before, but I knew, but by doing that, then I would have like a very concrete, tangible value. I also help them with like writing grant proposals. That's one easy thing. That's the easy thing that academics can immediately, like, we all know how to write grant proposals. And so I think there's like, you have to think about those like technical skills first. I think that's often a challenge for academics, is often they think like, well, what do I have to offer? Like I have, again, it's back to the expertise thing. Like, I am the expert on this particular subject, or I'm really good at, writing a certain genre. And that might not, again, this might not be immediately legible as a skill. Like, I'm sure it would be helpful, but I think you want to begin with the more tangible skills in order to make connections with an organization.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And to look around you first for opportunities, but also to think about the equity in this process, about not being extractive in the community engaged work, to really think about a mutually beneficial relationship. I was wondering, before we turn to the rest of the panelists, I could turn to Tiffany Pewitt, who introduced this panel, because I know that IDCL, among its many projects, is thinking about ways for people to train up in some of these approaches to community engaged work.
Sure, thanks, John Paul. I won't take too much time, but just mention that as part of the Grounded Knowledge Project, we are developing an online certificate on community-based research and public scholarship. The certificate is meant to be, it's very much introductory, but it's meant to kind of give people a taste of or introduce people to some of the methodological and ethical issues, some of the kind of skills, tools, and strategies that one might use for going into public research. And it's meant to kind of direct people towards resources and help people think about how they could do this work. We are imagining it as something that would work for graduate students who perhaps don't have so much support within their programs. But we are also imagining it as well for established scholars that are looking to pivot, or for folks that are just directing graduate students and aren't entirely sure where to direct them. So we think that we will have this launched in June. So stay tuned. We also have a new Grounded Knowledge Project website that's in development. It hasn't been launched yet. I'll post in the link that the IDCL website where we mentioned the Grounded Knowledge Project. But I will say as well that we have all of your, since you all registered for this, we have all of your email addresses. And once we have these resources, the website launched, we also have a YouTube playlist where we're posting the recordings of this webinar and some previous webinars. I'll send you all an email so that you can find all of those resources and that information. So, but thank you for asking, John Paul.
Of course, and these are two opportunities that I think will be really exciting and accessible to people where they are, which I think is really important. I'd like to make sure I open it up to Ashley and Moriah to chime in on that question if they'd like before we move to the next one in the chat.
Sure, I'll just add quickly, so in building kind of these open educational resource projects that we do at Full Spectrum Features, part of my work is that we, curate hundreds of primary and secondary sources for our learning site. And so I actually kind of pull together an advisory board, and it's for me a very large advisory board, like often over 30 people. And the reason why is because I have like K through 12 implementers, right, kind of like piloters, curriculum developers. Then I also have historians on it, right? So like there's a lane for the expert as well that I carve out very intentionally in our advisory boards. And so, I just want to give a plug that sometimes like a gem pops up where you're like, hey, that's the fit, and then of course the question is, well, how are you discoverable? Right. And so just so you know, I do a lot of Google searching, I do a lot of trying to find who are the people who are doing this work. I'm doing a project right now on Japanese American redress and its promises and consequences for present day Black American reparations efforts. And so I'm trying to like pull scholars in, from a lot of different places, a lot of different disciplines to help my team kind of make this really robust and accurate, but like rich learning resource and platform for learners, right? And so if I can discover you on LinkedIn or Google or whatever that looks like, it's just really helpful for me. And so I know that that's kind of it's low-hanging fruit, but it's very practical. And to be able to not only list your skills, which I totally second from what Jonathan said, but also like make it so that I can find you, because I do like I invite scholars in all the time, and we need scholars on these projects, and like I love being that bridge maker too.
This is great. Thank you. Moriah, anything to add to this, or would you like us to move to the next question?
I think you could move on because I'm not quite mid-career yet, but I will second everything that everyone said.
Well, no, I think this is great. I also wanted to recommend the National Humanities Conference, which has a virtual and a in-person component to it. It's one that brings together a lot the leadership of state humanities councils from across the country, and territorial councils from across the country to talk about issues of shared concern, but also a range of practitioners of publicly engaged humanities, and the discussions of what the humanities mean and what they are and how they live in communities is really rich and robust there. And there are a lot of opportunities for networking with people who are pursuing similar projects and initiatives to ones that might spark your own interest. I also see this becoming more and more of a feature of learned society conferences as well, of creating spaces for networking around this work. And it is really good to see what's out there and what people are doing, because one of the toughest things is to try to reinvent the wheel. So I know that's when you have so many other responsibilities on your plate, starting from zero is really difficult. So finding a community of practice can be really beneficial. I also I want to jump to this question before we turn to the question about undergraduate support, and because I know Jonathan mentioned starting an undergraduate course, so we want to turn to that. But one of our guests, Susanna Laramie-Kidd, a former ACLS public fellow, welcome. Susanna asked a question for Ashley. How do you see yourself remaining connected to and in conversation with academia, if you do at all, when your current role is not connected to academia? And I know you just mentioned the way that you're searching out different partners, and how that's happening not through a university, but through internet searches. But I'd love to hear you expand a little bit on that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I also, to your point too, I'm going to like American Historical Association for Asian American Studies, kind of our big disciplinary conferences too, to try to recruit and to share our work. So it's the both and. Right now I'm working on, I don't know if this is going to be the best way to answer this, so sorry, but right now I'm working on essay and article that really kind of gets down into the brass tacks of this project of mattering, right? So for a storytelling organization that uses film, that uses media, and we're trying to do this practice of radical inclusion, like why, and also why should funders invest in that is a big part of that. But I find myself really leaning in on the training that I developed over several years in my doctoral studies and my graduate work, right? And so I'm thinking a lot about, like, what does Saidiya Hartman say, about critical fabulation when we're engaging histories that have been erased so purposefully, out of our memory and out of our kind of like psyche, right? Social psyche. What does that mean, and how do we recuperate, and what does repair look like? And so I'm looking at these frameworks that I think pretty squarely live in scholarship and academia, and that's where I'm seeking some like interpretive and translation help, right? To an audience that I think could, maybe this piece winds up in more of an academic facing space, but that's not its end goal, right? I want it to be kind of facing outward to other partners, to our community who we're beholden to, and hopefully to people who might be interested in investing and supporting us in this work. And so I see myself pulling in some of these habits of mind, but also like where I think it's Natalie Lovelace that comes in with this idea of like cathetic work, right? So this work where it's like in an investment of emotion within the research process, right? And I think that comes to the fore a lot in what I'm doing, especially as I like build out this department and this division and try to kind of like situate ourselves within multiple industries. So thanks for being patient with my roundabout answer, but it was a wonderful question. Thanks for posing it.
It's such a good question, and I know a lot of PhDs who are pursuing careers beyond the academy think about different levels of connection to the academic enterprise, the scholarly enterprise, even as they construe themselves differently as what public scholar means to them in terms of their own practice, how they maintain, and if they want to refresh their connection to the academy. It's a really good one and a really interesting discussion topic for PhDs who are brought back into the conversation at the in departments and at the academy. I'm wondering though if we could turn to Jonathan just briefly to say and some final words about thinking about this at the undergraduate level, because that is we've mostly focused on the doctoral level here. That's where ACLS's home is, at the doctoral and postdoctoral levels, but obviously this is all connected to the way we construe what the humanities and interpretive social sciences are for successive generations of students coming into the undergraduate classroom as well.
Yeah, it's it's a similar issue. I mean, what I see, like, for instance, I teach the Introduction to Cultural Anthropology class, and I see at Brandeis, there's a huge interest in fields like anthropology and also interpretive social sciences and humanities, and students, but of course, rightfully, they want to know, like, what jobs can I get with this, or what are my potential career pathways? So what I started to do now in all my undergrad classes, is I have career panels all the time. I'm always inviting people, alumni, especially alumni who are anthropology majors and are working in a variety of careers. And I just have them Zoom in and just talk about their current work and how what they're doing in these variety of jobs connects with the topics, connects with what they learn in anthropology classes. And then also throughout the class, I try to mention, and I bring up examples of other anthropologists who are working in a variety of professional settings. I think just that at that awareness level, I think that just changes the conversation completely for undergraduates. And then of course I think they asked about of course, I think the other thing is, of course, internships. Sadly, I don't think undergrad career centers are historically like that helpful for internships in non-STEM areas. I could be wrong, but I think I've seen there's a bit of a problem there. And so often what happens is students, they have to like kind of invent their own internship. And some universities have, again, at Brandeis, there's a undergraduate fellowship where they can get an unpaid internship in their organization, and then Brandeis would then pay the student. So it's called a World of Work fellowship, and I think other universities have similar fellowships. So I think that's what I would say. Students should just find similarly organizations that they feel connected to. But back to John Paul, what you said, it's very important to not be extractive about this. They need also to think about what they, first and foremost, what they can contribute to these organizations as well.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I am very, very sorry that we've hit 5 o'clock, and I know that the time is up. I do want to first thank our panelists who offered such really wonderful insights on their own practice, but generally what they're seeing from their particular vantage points in their fields. That's incredibly helpful for us to think with. I do want to invite everybody again to take a look at the reports and the links that are in the chat. Maybe we can collect some of those links, Tiffany, and share them with everybody who's registered, just so that's in one easy place for them to find, if that's okay. But I also just really want to thank Tiffany for the invitation, and Elizabeth, who's in the room as well, who works at IDCL, for inviting us to have this really terrific conversation. Tiffany, can I turn it over to you for any final words?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. This has been a really rich and exciting conversation, and I really appreciate, the energy in our virtual space here for this topic. And also, we will make sure to follow up with all of you, sharing these resources that have been mentioned, and with some of the additional resources that came up too. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.